This video will briefly cover an exercise that a group of friends and I attempted to complete for our film class. In this exercise, we tried our best to utilize the exposure triangle, what is essentially a three-step balancing act between aperture, ISO, and shutter speed to gain greater creative control over images taken by a camera. Aperture decides to what degree your camera lens will widen, and by extent, how much light will be allowed to enter the lens. This actually affects the depth of field within the shot. In other words, the wider the lens, the closer an object must be to the camera to be in focus. The narrower the lens, the less focus is applied. ISO determines the camera's sensitivity to light. The higher the ISO, the greater sensitivity to light your image will achieve. Unlike aperture, which focuses more on how you want to shoot the scene, ISO becomes more important depending on what setting you wish to shoot in. Lastly is shutter speed. Essentially, shutter speed determines the amount of time the camera's sensor is exposed to light for, and is measured via fractions of a second. Typically in film, one will want a slower shutter speed as it creates a sense of motion, but this, like ISO and aperture, must also be adjusted according to the many factors unique to the video you are trying to capture. Here are a couple of videos we shot together which show how we utilize the exposure triangle, to the best of our ability. In this first shot of Blake dancing, the aperture is set to 5.6, a relatively wide opening. It is that which creates an effect of Blake being in the foreground and the background being just that. Since we were filming outside in Florida, an area well known for its brightness, our ISO was very low in order to balance the lighting of the shot. The shutter speed was 1/500th of a second, which allowed for Blake's movements to be recorded as a fluid motion. In this second shot, the ISO and frame rate were only slightly adjusted, however the aperture was left unchanged. This proved to be a mistake on my part, as since I didn't know exactly where Dylan and Blake were headed, the focus was not adjusted accordingly, resulting in Dylan entering the background just about here. This shot of Dylan speaking in an interview-like format required no change in the exposure triangle to create the desired effect, and it turned out quite well. The foreground/background effect is achieved, with all focus square on Dylan. This final quick shot of me opening the doors to the Fine Arts building was taken very early on in our filming process, which is why there is effectively no use of aperture in the video. I figured I'd include this just to show how much of a difference each part of the exposure triangle can make to a shot, and more importantly that I understand the concept. Hopefully. Well, that's pretty much the gist of it. Thanks for watching.